When I heard those words echo across the backyard at our annual family barbecue, everything inside me went silent. The laughter that followed felt like glass breaking in my chest. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, stood there with that smug smile painted across her face, holding her plastic cup of lemonade, like she had just delivered the punchline of the century. "Oh, come on, Mama Ruth," she had said, loud enough for every cousin, aunt, and uncle to hear. "We all know you're just waiting to die, so Marcus and I can finally get the house." The entire gathering erupted in laughter. Even my own son, my Marcus, the boy I had raised with these two hands after his father walked out on us when he was just 7 years old, threw his head back and laughed like it was the funniest thing he had ever heard. I stood there in my own backyard, surrounded by my own family, holding a plate of potato salad I had spent 3 hours making that morning, and I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my 72 years of living. The joke hung in the air like smoke from the grill, and everyone just kept on eating and drinking and carrying on like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just witnessed my own flesh and blood treating me like I was already in the ground. You see, this house has been my sanctuary for 43 years. These walls have seen me through the darkest nights when Marcus was sick with pneumonia at age 9, and I didn't know if he would make it through till morning. This kitchen has fed 3 generations of family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and quiet Sunday dinners. The front porch has been where I sat and waited for Marcus to come home from school every single day, where I taught him how to tie his shoes, and where we talked about his dreams of becoming an engineer. Every corner of this place holds memories that money could never buy, but Sarah had turned it all into a joke about my death, as if my entire life's work, my home, my legacy, was nothing more than a prize they were waiting to collect. The woman who had moved into my son's life 5 years ago and slowly but surely convinced him that his mother was nothing more than an obstacle standing between them and what they deserved. I remember the exact moment I realized how much things had changed between Marcus and me. It was 2 years ago, on a rainy Thursday evening. He had called to tell me they wouldn't be coming to Sunday dinner anymore because Sarah wanted to start hosting her own family gatherings. When I asked if I could join them instead, there was this long pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Mom, Sarah thinks it would be better if we kept things separate for a while. You know how she is about her space. Her space, in the apartment I was helping them pay rent for." That night at the reunion, after everyone had gone home and I was left cleaning up paper plates and plastic cups from my own yard, I made myself a promise. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same one where I had helped Marcus with his homework for 12 years, and I wrote down every single word Sarah had said. I wrote down who laughed and who looked uncomfortable. I wrote down the exact expression on my son's face when he decided that humiliating his mother was worth a few seconds of approval from his wife. The thing about being 72 years old is that you've had enough time to learn the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can give them. Sarah had never once asked me how I was feeling. She had never called just to chat, or invited me to lunch, or shown any interest in getting to know the woman who had raised the man she claimed to love. But she knew exactly how much my house was worth. She knew about the life insurance policy. She knew about the savings account I had been building for decades, penny by penny, so that Marcus would have something when I was gone. What she didn't know was that I had been planning to leave everything to him anyway, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because despite everything, He was still my son, and I had always believed that love meant providing for your children, even after you were no longer here to do it yourself. But that night, listening to her turn my eventual death into entertainment, something shifted inside me. Something hardened. The weeks following the reunion were quieter than usual. Marcus and Sarah went back to their lives, probably thinking the whole thing would blow over like it always did. They were used to me being the understanding mother, the patient woman who overlooked their thoughtlessness, because family is family, and blood is thicker than water. They had come to expect that no matter how they treated me, I would always be there with an open door and an open wallet when they needed something. But I wasn't the same woman who had stood in that backyard watching her own family laugh at her expense. I started paying attention to things I had ignored before, like how Marcus only called when he needed money for car repairs, or when Sarah wanted me to babysit their neighbor's dog so they could go on weekend trips they couldn't afford. Like how they never asked about my doctor's appointments, or whether I was lonely living in this big house by myself. Like how Sarah would roll her eyes whenever I told stories about Marcus's childhood, as if the 28 years I had spent raising him were just boring history that had nothing to do with their future. I began to see clearly what I had been too hopeful to acknowledge before. They weren't waiting for me to die because they loved me and wanted to honor my memory by taking care of the home I had built. They were waiting for me to die because I was inconvenient, because I was expensive, because I was taking up space in a house they had already mentally divided up and redecorated. 3 months after the reunion, I was sitting in my living room watching the evening news when my phone rang. It was Marcus, and I could tell immediately that something was wrong. His voice had that tight, stressed quality it got when he was trying not to panic. "Mom," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm." My heart started racing because those are never the words you want to hear from your child. I lost my job today. They're downsizing the whole department, and I was one of the last ones hired, so I was first to go. I felt my chest tighten, not because of the practical implications, but because I knew what was coming next. The request for help, the assumption that I would drop everything to fix their problems, the expectation that my checkbook would open just like it always had before. "I'm so sorry to hear that, baby," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I never wanted to see Marcus struggle. "How long do you think it will take you to find something new?" "I don't know, Mom. The market is really tough right now. Sarah's been looking for work too, but nothing's panning out. Her temp job ended last week, and we're already behind on rent. I was wondering if maybe you could help us out for a couple of months until we get back on our feet." There it was, the familiar rhythm of crisis and rescue that had defined our relationship for years. Marcus would find himself in trouble, usually because of poor planning or overspending, and I would step in to save the day. It was a dance we had performed so many times. I could have done it in my sleep, but this time, something was different. This time, I remembered the sound of laughter echoing across my backyard, the sight of my son's face lighting up with amusement at the thought of my death. "Let me think about it," I said. Words that had never come out of my mouth before in response to one of his requests for help. There was silence on the other end of the line, as if he couldn't quite process what he had heard. "Think about it," he repeated. "Mom, we really need help here. The landlord is already threatening eviction, and Sarah is beside herself with worry." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every time I had said yes, without question. Every time I had prioritized their comfort over my own financial security. Every time I had convinced myself that this was what good mothers did. "Marcus," I said, "I need to think about it. And that's what I mean. I'll call you back in a few days." When I hung up the phone, I sat in the quiet of my living room for a long time, listening to the grandfather clock tick away the minutes. The same clock that had been marking time in this house since before Marcus was born, that had counted down the days and months and years of a life I had built from nothing. For the first time in decades, I wasn't rushing to solve someone else's problem. I wasn't already reaching for my checkbook or calculating how much I could afford to give. I was thinking about the woman who had stood in that backyard and made my death the punchline of a joke, and about the son who had laughed along. The next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down with my financial statements spread across the kitchen table. I wanted to see exactly what helping Marcus and Sarah would mean for my own future, something I had never bothered to calculate before. The numbers told a story I hadn't been paying attention to. Over the past 5 years, since Sarah had entered the picture, I had given them over $18,000 in various forms of assistance: rent money, car payments, credit card bills, medical expenses, vacation funds, and dozens of smaller emergencies that always seemed to require immediate attention. $18,000, money that had come out of my retirement savings, my Social Security checks, the modest inheritance I had received when my sister passed away 3 years ago. Money that I had handed over without question because I believed that's what family meant. That's what love looked like. That's what mothers were supposed to do for their children, no matter how old those children got. But as I stared at those numbers, something else became crystal clear. That $18,000 represented more than just money. It represented every time I had eaten beans and rice for dinner so I could send them grocery money. Every time I had postponed my own doctor's appointments because the copays added up and I needed to save every penny for their next emergency. Every time I had told myself that new shoes could wait another year, that the leaky faucet could be fixed with duct tape, that the heating bill could stay a little higher if it meant keeping more money available for them. I had been living like a poor woman while funding the lifestyle of 2 grown adults who saw me as nothing more than a walking bank account with an expiration date. The realization hit me like cold water in the face. I had been so busy trying to be the mother I thought they needed that I had forgotten to be the woman I deserved to be. That afternoon, I drove to the library and spent 3 hours researching something I had never thought about before. What happens to elderly people who give away all their money to ungrateful family members? The stories I read made my blood run cold. Women my age, living in nursing homes they couldn't afford, surviving on government assistance because their children had bled them dry and then disappeared when the money ran out. Men who had worked their entire lives only to spend their final years dependent on strangers because the family they had supported had no interest in returning the favor. I thought about Mrs. Henderson from down the street, who had lived with her daughter's family for 2 years after giving them her house and all her savings. The daughter had promised to take care of her forever. But within 6 months, Mrs. Henderson was sleeping on a cot in the basement and eating whatever scraps were left after the family finished their meals. She died alone in that basement, while her daughter was upstairs planning a vacation funded by the sale of Mrs. Henderson's jewelry. Was that my future? Was I setting myself up to spend my final years as a burden to the same people who were already counting down the days until I was gone? The thought made me sick to my stomach, but it also made me angry. Angrier than I had been in years. I drove home that evening with a clarity I hadn't felt since I was a young woman raising Marcus by myself. Back then, every decision I made was about survival, about protecting him, and building a future for both of us. I had been fierce then, willing to work 3 jobs and fight anyone who tried to harm my child. Somewhere along the way, I had gotten soft, gotten comfortable with being taken advantage of because it felt easier than confronting the truth about what my relationship with Marcus had become. But that woman, that fierce young mother who had built this life from nothing, she was still inside me. She had just been sleeping under years of guilt and false obligations and the mistaken belief that love meant never saying no. When Marcus called again 2 days later, his voice was even more strained than before. "Mom, I really need an answer. The eviction notice came today, and we have less than a week to come up with the rent money. Sarah's been crying all morning, and I don't know what else to do." I could hear Sarah in the background, and she wasn't crying. She was yelling, "Just tell her we need the money, Marcus. Stop being so polite about it. She's got plenty, and she's not taking it with her when she goes." The casual cruelty of those words, spoken loud enough for me to hear them through the phone, confirmed everything I had been thinking. This wasn't about love or family or temporary help during a difficult time. This was about extraction. They saw me as a resource to be mined until nothing was left. "Marcus," I said, and my voice was steadier than it had been in years. "Do you remember what Sarah said at the family reunion 3 months ago?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear him thinking, trying to figure out which particular offense I was referring to. "What do you mean, Mom?" "About me waiting to die so you could get the house. About how everyone laughed when she said it. Do you remember that?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, that was just a joke. You know how Sarah is. She doesn't mean anything by it." "A joke," I repeated. "My death was a joke to her, and to you, apparently, since you laughed right along with everyone else. Mom, you're being too sensitive. Nobody meant anything bad by it. We were all just having fun at my expense, at the expense of the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him the life he had lived. The woman who had worked double shifts at the diner so he could play Little League. The woman who had sewn his Halloween costumes by hand because store-bought ones were too expensive. The woman who had taught him to drive in this very driveway, who had sat up all night when he was sick, who had cheered louder than anyone else at his high school graduation. "Marcus," I said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I have spent the last 3 days thinking about what you're asking me to do, and I've made a decision." "Thank God, Mom. I knew you'd come through for us. How much can you manage?" "We need at least $1,500 for the rent, and probably another $500 for utilities and groceries, until I find work." "I'm not giving you any money." The silence that followed was so complete, I thought the call had been disconnected. Then, I heard Sarah's voice, sharper and louder than before. "What do you mean she's not giving us money? Give me that phone." "Marcus," I continued, "for 5 years, I have watched your wife treat me like an inconvenience. I have listened to her complain about having to visit me, watched her roll her eyes when I speak, heard her make comments about my cooking, my decorating, my friends, my life. And through it all, I kept quiet because I thought that's what good mothers do. I thought that keeping peace was more important than keeping my dignity. Mom, please, this isn't the time for this conversation. We're about to be homeless. You made it the time for this conversation when you stood in my backyard and laughed at the thought of my death, when you treated the woman who raised you like nothing more than an obstacle between you and an inheritance. I could hear Sarah grabbing the phone, and suddenly her voice was in my ear, no longer trying to sound sweet or respectful. Ruth, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we need that money, and we need it now. You've got more than enough sitting in that bank account, and it's not like you're doing anything important with it. Actually, Sarah, I am doing something important with it. I'm keeping it for myself. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. We're family. Family helps each other. Family, I repeated. Is family what you call it when you publicly joke about waiting for someone to die? Is family what you call it when you only contact someone when you need money? Is family what you call it when you spend 5 years making it clear that someone is unwanted and unwelcome in your life? You're being ridiculous. That was months ago, and it was just a joke. Everyone knew it was a joke. The only thing that was a joke, Sarah, was me believing that you cared about anything other than what I could give you. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Sarah screaming about ingratitude and selfishness, about how they had never asked for much, about how I was going to die alone and bitter. Marcus took the phone back and tried to mediate, his voice pleading and desperate. But I could hear the entitlement underneath his panic, the assumption that I owed them this money, that my resources were automatically their resources, that my role in life was to solve their problems regardless of how they treated me. When I finally hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen and realized that for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't worried about their opinion of me. I wasn't calculating how much I could afford to give, or wondering if there was some compromise that would make everyone happy. I was thinking about myself, about my own future, about the woman I had been before I let guilt and manipulation convince me that my value was measured only by what I could provide. The phone rang 17 more times that evening. I didn't answer it once. Over the next few days, the calls came from other family members. Marcus had clearly been working the phones, telling his version of the story, painting me as a cruel and heartless woman who was abandoning her son in his hour of need. My sister-in-law called to tell me I was being unreasonable. A cousin I hadn't heard from in 2 years suddenly had opinions about my obligations as a mother. Even my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, stopped by to suggest that maybe I was letting pride get in the way of family love. But something had changed in me. Each conversation, each attempt to guilt me back into submission, only made me more certain that I had made the right decision. These people had watched Sarah humiliate me at that reunion. They had heard the laughter, seen the cruelty, witnessed the casual dismissal of my feelings, and not one of them had said a word in my defense. But now, when it came time for me to protect myself, suddenly they were all experts on family obligations, 2 weeks after I stopped answering their calls, I was sitting on my front porch enjoying my morning coffee when I saw Marcus's car pull into my driveway. My heart did that familiar flutter it always did when I saw him. But this time, it was mixed with something else. Wariness. The kind of caution you develop when you've learned that love and manipulation often wear the same face. He got out of the car slowly, his shoulders hunched in that way they used to get when he was a little boy who knew he was in trouble. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then, I remembered the sound of his laughter mixing with everyone else's that night, and my sympathy hardened into something colder. "Hi, Mama," he said, as he climbed the porch steps. He hadn't called me Mama in years. It was always Mom now, or nothing at all when Sarah was around. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the empty chair beside me, the same chair where he used to sit and tell me about his day when he was small. He looked older than his 35 years, worn down by stress and sleepless nights. Part of me wanted to reach out and smooth the worry lines from his forehead, like I used to do when he was scared. But I kept my hands wrapped around my coffee mug and waited for him to speak. "We got evicted," he said finally. "Yesterday. They changed the locks while we were at the unemployment office." I nodded, keeping my face neutral, even though my chest tightened. "Where are you staying?" Sarah's friend let us crash on her couch for a few days, but she says we can't stay much longer. "Mama, I'm not here to ask for money. I know you're upset with us, and maybe you have a right to be. I just want to understand what happened. What changed?" The question hung between us, like morning mist, delicate and fragile. I took a sip of my coffee and watched a cardinal land on the fence post across the yard, the same fence I had painted 3 times over the years, the same yard where I had pushed Marcus on a swing set that was long gone now. "What changed," I said slowly, "is that I finally heard you, really heard you. Not just the words you say when you need something, but the words you say when you think I can't hear them. The words you laugh at, the words you let your wife say about me." Marcus shifted in his chair, and I could see him struggling with something. "Sarah told me what she said to you on the phone. She was upset, scared about being homeless. People say things they don't mean when they're scared. Do they?" I turned to look at him directly. "Tell me, Marcus, when you were scared as a little boy, did you ever wish I was dead so you could have my things?" His face went pale. "Mama, that's not fair, isn't it? When you were 8 years old and afraid of the dark, did you ever think about how much easier your life would be if I wasn't around to complicate things? When you were 12 and embarrassed by our old car, did you ever joke with your friends about waiting for me to die so you could get something better? No, of course not. Then why is it acceptable now? Why is it funny now? What changed between the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street and the man who laughs when his wife treats my death like a punchline?" Marcus dropped his head into his hands, and for a moment he looked exactly like he did at age 7 when his father left us, small and lost and desperate for someone to make everything okay again. But I wasn't that young mother anymore. The one who thought protecting him from consequences was the same thing as loving him. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as just Mom, like you existed only to take care of me, to solve my problems, to be there whenever I needed something. And Sarah, she made it seem normal, like everyone treats their parents that way." At least he was being honest. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was more than I had gotten from him in years. "And now?" I asked. "Now we're sleeping on a friend's couch, eating ramen noodles, and Sarah blames you for all of it. She says you're punishing us for one stupid joke, that you're being petty and vindictive." He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Are you? Are you punishing us?" I set my coffee mug down on the little table between our chairs and really considered his question. Was this punishment, or was it simply the natural consequence of treating someone badly for so long that they finally stopped allowing it? "Marcus, let me ask you something. If one of your friends treated you the way Sarah treats me, would you keep giving them money? That's different. How is it different?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. We sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the birds and the distant sound of traffic. Finally, he spoke again. "She's getting worse, you know, since we got evicted. She blames you for everything, but she's also angry at me for not being able to fix it. Yesterday, she threw a plate at the wall and screamed that she never should have married someone whose mother was so selfish. And what did you say to that? Nothing. What could I say? We're homeless because I can't provide for my wife, and my own mother won't help us. The way he said it, like it was a simple statement of fact rather than a choice he had participated in making, told me everything I needed to know about how little had actually changed. He was still seeing this as something that had been done to him, rather than something that had grown naturally from the seeds he had helped plant. Marcus, I said gently, do you remember when you were 16 and you wanted to quit school to work at the garage? He looked confused by the change of subject. Yeah, you said absolutely not. Do you remember what you said to me? You said I was ruining your life, that I didn't care about what you wanted, that I was just being mean because I could be. I was 16. 16-year-olds say stupid things. Yes, they do. And what did I do? You made me stay in school, even though you were angry with me, even though you thought I was being unfair, even though it would have been easier to just let you do what you wanted and avoid the conflict. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him beginning to understand where I was going with this. You did what you thought was best for me in the long run, even though it made you the bad guy in the short run, he said slowly. That's right. Sometimes loving someone means disappointing them. Sometimes it means letting them face the consequences of their choices instead of rushing in to save them from their own mistakes. So this is tough love? I shook my head. No, baby. This is self-preservation. Tough love is when you make hard choices because you believe they'll help someone grow. This is me finally admitting that I can't help you grow until you decide you want to change. And right now, it seems like the only thing you want to change is my willingness to fund the life you've been living. Marcus was quiet for a long time after that. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. What would it take for you to help us again? The question I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. I looked at this man, who was still my son, despite everything, still the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, and I felt the weight of every choice that had led us to this moment. I don't know, I said honestly. I know that Sarah would have to acknowledge what she did and genuinely apologize for it. Not because she needs money, but because she understands that she hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I know that you would have to take responsibility for allowing it to happen, for participating in it, for treating me like my feelings don't matter, as long as my checkbook is available. And if we did that, if we both apologized and meant it, then maybe we could start rebuilding a relationship based on respect instead of need. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. Even if that happened, even if you both had genuine changes of heart, I'm not going back to being your emergency fund. I'm 72 years old, and I need to think about my own future now. He nodded slowly, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Can I ask you something else? Of course. Are you lonely, living here by yourself, not talking to us? The question surprised me with its directness. Sometimes, I admitted, but I'm learning the difference between being alone and being lonely. I was lonelier when I was constantly worried about whether you needed something, constantly walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting Sarah, constantly feeling like I had to earn my place in my own son's life. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know you didn't, but wanting something and working to make it happen are two different things. Marcus stood up then, looking older and more tired than when he had arrived. I need to think about what you said, about all of this. Take your time, but Marcus, understand that thinking isn't enough. If you want a different relationship with me, you're going to have to do different things. And that starts with how you handle Sarah. He walked back to his car without saying goodbye, and I watched him drive away with a mixture of sadness and relief. It was the first honest conversation we had had in years, maybe ever. It hadn't solved anything, but at least we both knew where we stood now. That evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah, and she was angrier than I had ever heard her. "I don't know what kind of poison you put in Marcus's head today, but he came home talking crazy about apologies and taking responsibility. We are about to be sleeping in our car, and you're worried about hurt feelings. Sarah, Marcus came to see me. I didn't ask him to come. Don't play innocent with me, Ruth. You know exactly what you're doing. You're using our situation to manipulate us, to force us to grovel and beg, just so you can feel important again." The accusation was so backwards, so completely opposite to what had actually happened, that I almost laughed. Almost. "Sarah, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I have never asked you to grovel. I have never asked you to beg. In fact, I've never asked you for anything at all. Not respect, not kindness, not even basic politeness. But I'm not going to pay for the privilege of being treated badly anymore. You're sick, you know that? What kind of mother abandons her son when he needs her most? The kind who finally realizes that being needed and being used are not the same thing." She hung up on me, but not before I heard her say something to Marcus about his crazy old mother and how they needed to find another way to get money. The casual dismissal in her voice, the assumption that I was the problem rather than the solution, confirmed everything I had been thinking about their true motivations. Over the next few weeks, I heard through the family grapevine about their situation. They had moved in with Sarah's sister, who lived in a one-bedroom apartment across town. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but Sarah's sister had 3 children of her own and a husband who worked night shifts. The stress was building, and according to my cousin, who knew Sarah's sister from church, there were arguments every night. Marcus had found a part-time job at a hardware store, but it barely paid enough to cover gas money and food. Sarah was still unemployed, spending her days applying for jobs and complaining about how unfair life was. They were living on food stamps and whatever charity they could find, a far cry from the comfortable life they had been living when my checks were supplementing their income. Part of me felt guilty about their suffering, the part that had been trained for decades to put their comfort above my own well-being. But another part of me, the part that was growing stronger every day, recognized this as exactly what needed to happen. They were finally experiencing the natural consequences of their choices, finally learning what it felt like to live within their actual means instead of their expectations. I used this time to focus on myself in ways I hadn't done in years. I joined a senior center book club and discovered that I loved discussing literature with people who shared my interests. I started taking watercolor classes and found out I had a talent for painting landscapes. I began volunteering at a local food bank, and the irony wasn't lost on me that I was helping feed strangers while my own son was learning what food insecurity felt like. But most importantly, I started making friends. Real friends, not family members who tolerated me because they had to, or people who were nice to me because they wanted something. These were women my age who had lived full lives, who had their own stories of triumph and disappointment, who valued my company for who I was rather than what I could provide. Eleanor, who had been married to an engineer for 43 years before he passed away. Dorothy, who had raised 6 children, mostly by herself, while her husband traveled for work. Margaret, who had survived breast cancer twice and still volunteered at the hospital 3 days a week. These women had wisdom and strength and humor, and they welcomed me into their circle with the kind of genuine warmth I had forgotten existed. For the first time in years, I had people to call when I was bored or lonely. I had plans that didn't revolve around solving other people's problems. I had conversations about books and politics and travel, instead of constantly talking about Marcus and Sarah's latest crisis. I was remembering who Ruth had been before she became just Marcus's mother and Sarah's easy mark. 3 months after Marcus's visit to my porch, I was getting ready for book club when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Sarah standing on my front step, and she looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes were wrinkled, and she had dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant stress. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Ruth," she said, and her voice was different than I had ever heard it. Smaller, less certain. "I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About what I said. At the reunion. And on the phone. And probably a dozen other times when I thought you weren't listening or didn't care." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I had grown so accustomed to. But what I saw instead was exhaustion. Genuine, bone-deep exhaustion that comes from fighting a battle you can't win. "Go on," I said. "I was wrong. What I said about you waiting to die, it was cruel and stupid, and I knew it was wrong, even when I said it. I just thought it was funny, you know, like a joke that everyone would laugh at because it was so obviously not true. But it was true, wasn't it? You were waiting for me to die so you could have my house." She flinched as if I had slapped her. Maybe part of me was thinking that way. But Ruth, I need you to understand something. I've never had anything of my own. My parents lost their house when I was 12. We moved around a lot after that, never staying anywhere long enough for it to feel like home. When I met Marcus, and he told me about this house, about growing up here, about how stable and secure his childhood was, I wanted that so badly, I could taste it. So, you decided to wait for me to die to get it? I decided to hate you for having what I wanted. And that's not fair, and it's not right, and I'm sorry. It was more honesty than I had expected from her, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. "Sarah, why are you here now? What's changed?" She looked down at her hands, and I could see them shaking slightly. "Everything's falling apart. Marcus and I, we're fighting all the time. His sister won't let us stay much longer, and I can't find work anywhere. We're talking about maybe getting divorced because the stress is just too much. And you think I can fix that?" I think I finally understand what Marcus has been trying to tell me for weeks, that I burned a bridge I didn't even know I needed, that I treated someone badly who never did anything to deserve it, that I let my own jealousy and insecurity turn me into someone I don't like very much. I looked at this woman who had caused me so much pain, who had stood in my backyard and made my death into entertainment for my own family, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "Sarah, even if I believed that you're genuinely sorry, even if I thought this apology was about more than just wanting my help, what makes you think anything could ever be the same between us?" "I don't," she said quietly. "I don't think anything can be the same. I just hope that maybe, someday, it could be better." I stood there looking at Sarah on my front porch, this woman who had spent years making my life smaller and meaner, and I realized that her apology, genuine as it might be, couldn't undo the damage that had already been done, not just to our relationship, but to something deeper inside me. Something that had been broken the night she turned my mortality into a punchline for strangers to laugh at. "Sarah," I said finally, "I appreciate you coming here and saying these things, but you need to understand that sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I spent walking on eggshells around you, trying to earn basic respect in my own family." She nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. I know it's not enough, but what can I do? How can I make this right?" "I don't know if you can," I said, and the honesty of it seemed to surprise us both. Some things, once they're broken, stay broken. Some words, once they're said, can't be taken back. So that's it? You're just going to let us lose everything because I made one stupid joke? And there it was. The real Sarah, still hiding underneath the apology, still making this about what she was losing, rather than what she had done. Still acting like my refusal to rescue them was punishment, rather than simple self-preservation. "Sarah, you didn't make one stupid joke. You made a pattern of choices over 5 years that showed me exactly how little you valued me as a person. The joke was just the moment I finally heard what you'd been telling me all along." I stepped back and started to close the door, but she put her hand up to stop me. "Please, Ruth, Marcus is falling apart. He won't eat, barely sleeps. He keeps saying he ruined the most important relationship in his life, and I think he might hurt himself if things don't get better soon." The manipulation was expertly done. I had to give her credit for that. Using my love for my son, my fear for his well-being, as leverage to get what she wanted. But I had learned something important over these past few months. Love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's poor choices. Love doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior because saying no feels too hard. "Sarah, if Marcus is struggling with depression or having thoughts of self-harm, then he needs professional help, not money from his mother. There are counselors, support groups, resources for people in crisis. But what he doesn't need is to be rescued from the consequences of his own actions once again." "You're really not going to help us at all." "I'm helping you right now by not enabling you. I'm helping Marcus by not teaching him that his actions don't have consequences. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them fall down so they can learn to get back up on their own." After Sarah left, I went inside and called my friend Eleanor. "I need to talk to someone who understands," I said when she answered. "Come over," she said immediately. "I'll put on some tea." An hour later, I was sitting in Eleanor's sunny kitchen, telling her about Sarah's visit and the guilt that was eating at me, despite everything I knew to be true. "You know what the hardest part is?" I said, stirring honey into my tea. "Part of me still wants to fix it for them. Part of me is still that mother who would do anything to make her child's pain go away." "Of course you do," Eleanor said gently. "That's not a weakness, Ruth. That's love. But love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's codependency. How do you know the difference? Love wants what's best for someone, even when it's hard. Codependency wants what feels good in the moment, even when it's harmful in the long run. Love says, I care about you too much to enable your self-destructive choices. Codependency says, I can't bear to see you uncomfortable, so I'll sacrifice myself to make it better. Eleanor had been through something similar with her own daughter years ago. The wisdom in her words came from hard-earned experience, from her own journey of learning to love without losing herself. What if Marcus really does something drastic? I asked. What if my refusal to help pushes him over the edge? Then that would be tragic, but it wouldn't be your fault. You didn't create his problems, Ruth. You didn't make him dependent on your money. You didn't teach him that other people exist to solve his difficulties. Those are lessons he learned somewhere else, and they're lessons only he can unlearn. We talked for 2 hours, and by the time I left Eleanor's house, I felt steadier in my resolve. Not completely at peace with it, but steadier. Over the next few weeks, I heard more updates through the family network. Marcus and Sarah had been asked to leave his sister's apartment after a particularly loud fight that had upset the children. They were now staying in their car, parking in different locations each night to avoid being noticed by police. Marcus had lost his part-time job after missing too many shifts, apparently due to the stress and lack of sleep that comes with being homeless. The family pressure on me intensified. My sister-in-law called to tell me that Marcus had shown up at her house at 3 a.m, desperate and incoherent. My cousin reported that Sarah had been seen at the local food pantry, looking thin and defeated. Even my pastor, somehow drawn into the drama, suggested gently that forgiveness might include practical assistance for those in need. But the more desperate their situation became, the clearer it became to me that this was exactly what needed to happen. For 35 years, Marcus had lived with the certainty that no matter what choices he made, his mother would be there to cushion the fall. He had never learned to be truly responsible for himself because he had never faced the full consequences of irresponsibility. And Sarah, who had spent our entire relationship treating me like an obstacle to overcome rather than a person to respect, was finally experiencing what life looked like without the safety net she had taken for granted. The safety net she had mocked and dismissed and expected to catch her anyway. I found myself thinking about my own mother, who had died when I was 23, just 2 years before Marcus was born. She had been a strong woman, raised during the Depression, who understood that life was hard and that strength came from facing that hardness rather than running from it. "Baby girl," she used to tell me, "you can't help someone by doing for them what they should be doing for themselves. All you do is make them weak and make yourself tired." I had forgotten that wisdom somewhere along the way, lost it in the day-to-day work of trying to be a good mother. But now, sitting in my quiet house with my watercolor paints and my library books and my new friendships, I was remembering who I had been before I became someone else's solution to everything. 2 months later, I was at the grocery store when I saw Marcus. He was in the checkout line ahead of me, counting out food stamps to pay for a small basket of basic items. Rice, beans, generic peanut butter, white bread, the kind of shopping I remembered from my own lean years as a young single mother. He looked terrible, thinner than I had ever seen him, with a scraggly beard and clothes that clearly hadn't been washed in a while. But there was something else in his posture, something I hadn't seen in years. He was standing straight, handling his business with quiet dignity, not looking around to see if anyone was judging him for using government assistance. When he turned to leave, he saw me and froze. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the fluorescent-lit store, two people who had loved each other completely and lost their way. "Hi, Mama," he said quietly. "Hi, baby. How are you doing?" "I'm okay. We're okay. Sarah found a job at a cleaning service, and I'm working construction when there's work available. We got into a transitional housing program, so we have a roof over our heads for the next 6 months while we try to get back on our feet." "That's good. I'm glad you're working." "Yeah, me too." He shifted the grocery bag in his arms. "Mama, I want you to know that I understand now why you said no. I didn't at first, but I do now. Sarah and we had gotten so used to having you as our backup plan that we never learned to be our own backup plan." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I'm not asking for anything, he continued quickly. I just wanted you to know that I get it now. What we did to you, what I let happen, it was wrong. And I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to see it. Marcus, being sorry is important, but it's just the beginning. What matters now is what you do with what you've learned. I know, and I'm trying. Sarah and we're in counseling together and separately. We're learning about boundaries and communication and how to have a relationship that doesn't depend on other people solving our problems. How is Sarah doing with all of this? Marcus was quiet for a moment. She's struggling. The counselor says she has some issues around security and control that go back to her childhood. But she's trying too. She asked me to tell you that she thinks about what she said to you every day, and she knows now how much it hurt you. And you, how are you doing with it? Some days are harder than others. I miss you, Mama. I miss being able to call you when things get scary. But I'm also learning that I'm stronger than I thought I was. That maybe I needed to find that out. We talked for a few more minutes, carefully, like people learning a new language. When he left, I watched him walk across the parking lot to an old car I didn't recognize, probably something they had bought cheap after losing their previous vehicle. Sarah was waiting in the passenger seat, and when she saw me through the store window, she lifted her hand in a small wave. Not friendly, exactly, but not hostile either. That night, I called Eleanor and told her about the encounter. How do you feel about seeing them like that? She asked. Sad, I said honestly, but also relieved. Sad because no mother wants to see her child struggling, but relieved because I can see that the struggling is teaching them things that my money never could. Do you think you'll ever have a real relationship with them again? I don't know. Maybe. But if we do, it will have to be a different kind of relationship. One where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. One where love doesn't come with a price tag attached. 6 months later, I received a letter in the mail. Not a phone call or a text message, but an actual handwritten letter. It was from Marcus, written on lined notebook paper, in the careful handwriting I remembered from his childhood. Dear Mama, it began. Sarah and I have been talking about writing this letter for weeks, but we wanted to make sure we were ready to say what needed to be said without asking for anything in return. We graduated from the transitional housing program last month and moved into a small apartment that we can afford on our own. It's not much, but it's ours, and we're proud of it because we earned it. Sarah has been promoted to a supervisor position at her job, and I'm working steady hours with a construction crew that's teaching me new skills. More importantly, we're both in a better place emotionally than we've been in years. The counseling has helped us understand how we got to where we were and why we treated you the way we did. I know now that I spent so many years seeing you as my safety net that I forgot to see you as a person with your own feelings and needs and dignity. Sarah wants you to know that she's ashamed of the things she said, not just at the reunion, but over the years. She knows that sorry isn't enough, but she's working every day to become the kind of person who would never treat someone that way again. I don't know if you'll ever want to see us again, or if you can ever forgive us for the way we treated you. I wouldn't blame you if you couldn't, but I wanted you to know that losing you was the wake-up call we needed, even though it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. You raised me to be a good man, Mama. Somewhere along the way, I forgot those lessons, but I'm trying to remember them now. I hope someday I can make you proud again. All my love, Marcus. P.S. Sarah asked me to tell you that she drives past the house sometimes, not to bother you, but because she's trying to understand what it meant to you. She says she finally gets it now. Why it hurt so much when she made that joke. She sees it as your life's work, not just a building. She wanted you to know that. I read that letter 3 times before I set it down, and each time I felt something shifting inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but something softer than the anger I had been carrying. Something that felt like the possibility of healing. I didn't write back immediately. Instead, I took the letter to my book club and asked the ladies what they thought. These women, who had become my closest friends over the past year, listened carefully as I read it aloud. "What do you think?" I asked when I finished. Dorothy, who had raised 6 children and buried 1, spoke first. "I think it sounds like they've finally learned what you were trying to teach them by walking away." Margaret, the cancer survivor, nodded. "The question is, what do you want to do with that? What would feel right for you, not for them or for anyone else's expectations, but for you?" Eleanor, who knew my story better than anyone, was quiet for a long moment. "Ruth, you've spent this whole year learning to live for yourself. Whatever you decide about Marcus and Sarah, make sure it's a decision that honors the woman you've become, not the woman you used to be." That letter sits on my kitchen table to this day, a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to step back. I never did write Marcus back, not because I didn't love him, but because I finally understood that real change has to come from within, not from the promise of restored relationships or forgiveness. Today, I'm living my best life at 73. I travel with my book club friends. I paint watercolors that hang in local galleries. And I wake up every morning knowing that every dollar in my account is mine to spend as I choose. The house that Sarah once joked about inheriting, I've decided to leave it to charity when I'm gone. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to someone. It's what you stop doing for them.